Okay, so today we're going to be making duck confit, which is very much a extravagant French dish that's traditionally made with duck legs. However, it's so much more than that. It's actually also a preservation technique. If you were to go back in the time Napoleon, people would actually kill a few dozen ducks in the winter and they would have to preserve it somehow. And confit was a style of preservation that they used to keep the legs good for up to a year. I'm going to be making 8 duck confit and I'm going to be doing it in the traditional fashion so we can preserve it for a very long time. Now the first step in making duck confit is get yourself some really nice duck legs and we're going to trim off any excess fat. After we trim off any excess fat, it's also good to look over the duck legs to see if there's any leftover feather bases. Plucking duck feathers is actually harder than plucking chicken feathers, and often they'll break off and not fully come out of the skin. I don't see any here, but it's always good to give one look over when we're working with duck legs. After cleaning and trimming the duck legs, our first step is to find the total weight of all the duck legs you plan on confiting in grams. The cure that we're going to be making is going to be based upon the total weight, and having it measured in grams is going to make the math a lot easier. So I have roughly 2,050 grams worth of duck legs. Our next step is to create the cure, which is the first step in preserving our duck legs or making the confit. And our cure is going to be based upon the total weight of our duck legs, which for me is about 2,000 grams. Now, the amount of salt we need is going to be 2.5% of your weight, which for me is 51 grams. So I'm going to measure out exactly 51 grams of non-iodized kosher salt. Next, I'm going to take 1/10 of the amount of salt, which for me is 5.1 grams, and measure that out using pink curing salt. Now, since I tend to store my duck confit for a very long time, up to 4 or 5 months, I'm going to use pink curing salt number 2, which is the longer storing salt. If you're only going to be storing this for a month, you can use pink curing salt number 1. In addition to using salt, we're also going to add in some spices. Now, duck is a very gamey meat, which means it has a relatively strong flavor. And because of that, we can use some pretty strong flavored spices because it won't actually overpower the taste of the duck. And I'm going to choose to use a Parisian game spice that I came up with, which is mainly a combination of star anise, juniper berries, and coriander seed, along with pepper and a few other things. And I'm going to use about 3 to 3.5% of the weight of my duck in that Parisian game spice. I'm also going to add in some minced shallots, garlic, thyme, rosemary, and sage, and a few coarsely broken up bay leaves. All right, next is to thoroughly season all of our duck legs with our cure, and we are going to use all of it because this is the exact amount of salt that we need to properly cure these duck legs. And although you can rub it in on the skin, it's really the meat side that is the most important. After thoroughly rubbing the cure into all of your duck legs, the next step is to put it into an airtight container in the store for a day and a half, giving time for the cure to fully marinate and season the meat. I'm placing the meat side up so the force of gravity can really aid in pulling the salt and all of the seasonings into the meat. Well, it's been about a day and a half, and our duck legs have been sitting in the refrigerator, marinating and curing in all of the spices and salt. And now it's time to move on to step 2, which is to cook the duck legs. And it just so happens the way that we're going to cook them is also going to pasteurize them, and what allows us to store them for such a long period of time. After removing the duck legs from the refrigerator, we're going to brush off and clean off all of the spices and salts that are on them. We don't need them any longer, and the duck legs have thoroughly absorbed all those flavors. Then we're going to place it into a pot that is large enough to fit all the legs comfortably on the bottom without any overlapping. And then over that, we're going to pour in our duck fat. So hopefully you reserve the duck fat from the duck demi-glaze that we made a few days ago. And we're going to pour that duck fat on top. And if you were planning on storing these and preserving them, you're probably going to have to buy a good deal more duck fat. However, if you're going to eat them within the week, you don't have to worry about that. You can just use the duck fat that you got from the duck bodies. Now we're going to place it into a 200-degree oven and we're going to cook them for 10 hours. That will be enough time to really break down any tough meat in the duck legs, but it won't be so long where the collagen in the skin starts to break down, meaning we'll still be able to crisp up the skin when we serve them. Well, now it's been about 10 hours and our duck legs are thoroughly cooked through. And our next step, if you're preserving them, is to grab a few containers to put them in. As you can see, I also decided to heat up some more duck fat on the stove, which I'm going to need in preserving the duck legs. We're going to carefully, with a slotted spatula, move the duck legs, which are extremely delicate right now, into a container, and you want to have no overlapping, and the duck legs to be spread out on the bottom. Next, we're going to ladle in enough duck fat to cover the duck legs by at least 1/4 of an inch, although more is better as well. This layer of fat is going to seal the duck legs completely from the environment and any airborne pathogen. Then we're going to let the containers cool down to room temperature for at least 3 hours before we put them into the refrigerator. If the surface of the duck fat cools too fast, like it would in a refrigerator, as the remaining fat starts to shrink, you could get surface cracks on the top, which would allow air to come in contact with the duck legs and cause spoilage. So we really need to make sure these cool down to room temperature before we move them into the refrigerator. And assuming you did everything correctly, that you used the right amount of salt, the right amount of pink curing salt, which is not Himalayan pink salt, but you need to use actual pink curing salt, and that you cook them for the full 10 hours and completely submerge them in duck fat, you should be able to store these at cellar temperatures for up to a year. And as time goes on, the flavor is only going to get better because those legs are going to ferment as they're sitting in the duck fat and start to develop secondary flavors as well. We're going to show you what you do in order to serve duck legs and how to make a very quick and simple fig sauce that will go with them. All right, so we just spent 2.5 days making duck confit, and it is time to serve these things. And you must be thinking, what kind of time suck is this going to be? But actually, this is the easiest part of serving duck confit. First thing we're going to do is take our duck out of our cellar or refrigerator, wherever you're storing it, to allow the fat to come to room temperature, which is going to make it easier for us to get the duck out of the container that it's in. I've already poured off a lot of this fat, and we're going to transfer the legs to a nice pot, skin side up. All right, so now we're going to place this into a 500-degree oven for 10 minutes. After the duck is cooked for 10 minutes and the skin gets really crisp, we're going to lower it down to 350 degrees and cook it for another 10 minutes to make sure it's evenly heated. All right, now we're going to make a really simple sauce to go with our duck confit. Duck is a very gamey meat, has a strong flavor, and the spices we use also have a particularly strong flavor, and they tend to go really well with fruits. So I'm going to be making a very quick and easy fig sauce. So I'm going to start off by pouring in some of our duck demi-glaze that I know you made because I told you not to waste those carcasses. And to that, we're going to add an equal amount of fig jam we bought from the store. Now I know this doesn't look quite equal, but I did make this sauce a couple days ago and I'm not wasting it, so I'm just kind of making this sauce a little bit more figgy. Heat that up and thoroughly mix it together. All right, so the richness from the demi-glaze and the sweetness from the figs are going to go together really well. However, the sauce is still going to be just a tad too sweet. So to fix that, we're going to pour in a little bit of balsamic vinegar. The acid from the vinegar is going to help balance out the sugars in the fig jam, and it's also going to add a whole nother layer of flavor. Okay, so we're going to bring this to a boil, lower it to a simmer, and just let it stay on the stove until the duck is finished in the oven. All right, so our duck confit is now finished and it's ready to be plated. We're going to start off by pouring a generous amount of our fig sauce onto our plate, and we're going to carefully remove our duck confit and place it directly on top of the fig sauce. And then we are not going to pour any more sauce on top of the duck confit because that would just make the skins soggy. But this sauce is really good, so be sure to pour yourself a little souffle cup of it so you can enjoy more of it during dinner. And then to finish, we're going to serve with our favorite vegetables and starch. And enjoy!